do we build community or do we grow community? You'll hear people say over and over again, I'm building a community, we're building community here. That's missing a vital dimension of what community is as a phenomenon, which actually goes through cycles of renewal. Buildings don't go through cycles of renewal. They're made of modular parts, and you can replace a brick or a tile. But people aren't like that, right? Like the participants of community aren't like that.
Hi, I'm Alex. Welcome to Voices of Emergence. In each episode, we journey with courageous thinkers, creators, and system shifters who are reimagining leadership, business, community from the ground of consciousness and care. How do we evolve beyond extractive systems? How do we meet a world in transition with soul, with integrity and imagination? Join us as we embrace the paradox of being human and step into a living story of emergence, integration, and possibility. I'm joined today by my dear friend and co-host, Rudy Dewale. What I really admire about Rudy is the way he listens. He brings people together with care and clarity, holding space at the intersection of innovation, inner work, and cultural renewal. And I'm really looking forward to this, and welcome, Rudy.
Yes, thank you, Alex, for this introduction. And today we're joined by Tom Mansfield, the systems thinker, regenerative strategist, and the founder of Pale Blue, a practice dedicated to aligning individuals and organizations with the living systems of our planet. Tom is the creator of Cards for Life and the Thinking Like Gaia framework, tools that invite us to reimagine how we relate to the world, not through extraction and control, but through participation, reciprocity, and care. His work spans coaching, organizational design, eco-linguistics, and regenerative infrastructure, always with one guiding inquiry: how do we create cultures and systems that are truly life-sustaining? A student of permaculture and NLP, Tom brings together over 15 years of experience across the built environment, the arts, technology, and ecological leadership. He's worked with cultural institutions, led climate programs through the Carbon Removal Center, nurturing a global community of practitioners reweaving the human and more than human worlds. At the heart of his work is a language of connection, an invitation to feel and to build from a deeper truth, that the earth is not a resource but a relative. Welcome, Tom.
Wow, thank you, Rudy, for that introduction. It's very kind and touched on, a lot of major points. And it's lovely to be here with both of you. I'm looking forward to see where we take this conversation.
Yeah, the first word, as the name of our podcast is Voices of Emergence, is the first question I wanted to ask is like, when you hear the word emergence, what image or sensation arises within you?
Wow, I can definitely respond to that because it's so much the kind of concept or process at the core of the work that I'm engaged in most of the time. Actually, the image that comes to me is something that I discovered kind of recently. It's a particular form of fractal pattern called a Ford circle. And it's like if you imagine two edges of a circle like this, making a fluted shape with circles inside, getting smaller and smaller as they kind of grow out. So it's almost like this shape with kind of circles fizzing out of it, getting smaller and smaller in a fractal pattern. And it's a beautiful kind of fractal. And it makes me think of emergence because it's this kind of bubbling up, fizzing up. There's an energetic rising. So those are the sensations that come with that. I do think of myself as there's a label emergentist or an emergentist view of life. And I guess in the way that we kind of learn and get familiar with concepts, they kind of go through their own cycles. So we discover things and we kind of rediscover them. And lately, my rediscoverance of a discovery of emergence is coming into my work in supporting people really to say, like, if you can fully picture what you're creating, then it's not going to be anything new, right? It's not genuinely going to be an emergence, more than the sum of the parts that are collected here now. So I really like this kind of fizzing upward, but also into uncertainty. We can't know all the details of what's coming next, and that does require us to approach our work in the world and our lives in a different way when they're emerging. And so I'm really fascinated in that difference between emergence and design, which is not to put design down at all, but it is a different kind of process when we prefigure the parts of something, which is an important process and discipline as well. But I think this thing of working with emergence is really fascinating to me. And there's an inherent mystery in it, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you, Tom. I like this idea of the Ford circles. I tend to see it as a spiral in a Fibonacci sequence that kind of spirals upwards. So sometimes we revisit the same experiences in life, but with a slightly different lens, with slightly more experience. And, each time around, we get a little bit better and better until we learn the lessons. But can you tell me a little bit more about your life story? How have your beliefs changed over time? And were there any cathartic or special moments that really changed the way you think and made you more whole?
Wow, thank you for that question, Alex. It's a really rich one. Just feeling for where to answer that from. Yeah, like I wonder about that. How has my thinking changed? And sometimes I realize I actually saw things, I think, in quite a pure way when I was in my teens. And now I have a lot more detail to kind of go with those thoughts and feelings. I guess one thing that came to mind that shifted, feels like it's shifted for me is when I was meeting a lot of ideas for the first time about the world, history, where is all of this going? What's humanity's purpose? These sorts of questions. I came into that space with a very, in my teenage idealistic years, very anti-religion stance. And I've surely lost that. I don't identify with a religious faith, but I now increasingly work with the centrality of spirituality. I'm really enjoying Thomas Berry at the moment. I'm reading Sacred Universe, which is a kind of interfaith, almost post-faith perspective on the sanctity of life and a really kind of earth-rooted religious paradigm, maybe that's part of the regenerative movement. So I'm finding all of that fascinating. And I think that's changed a lot probably from my more kind of anti-aggressive stance to those sorts of ideas when I was younger. I don't really see that on a timeline with my own transformations. I think something that I've learned or something that's really shaped me is, yeah, from a young age or different chapters in my life, battles with addiction, with drug addiction. And there continues to be learning beyond that of what's symptoms of pain, which are the classic thing to treat with drugs. What is that pain? Is it intergenerational? I feel like I'm a place where I can peel back some deeper layers of that now, long free from kind of drug addiction. But going through that, there were significant times where that really kind of broke me down, and I really did have to rebuild myself. And that's, of course, a powerful process to go through. It's not an enjoyable one to be going through, but it's really informed my view of how change happens in the world. And I think there's probably wisdom to come from that experience meeting the world still. And I wouldn't say that I've necessarily got it, but it definitely gives me a lens when I look at the kind of the growth society or the kind of consumption patterns that we're locked into as a kind of growing civilization. I look at that very much through a lens of addiction and informed by my own personal process of breakdown, almost a kind of chaotic sort of rite of passage. There wasn't a society or culture to perform a kind of transitional rite for me, and I sort of found a way of doing that on my own, but it was quite messy. I wonder about how we make this shift collectively from soothing ourselves, hitting the pleasure distraction button. Is there a way of doing that without some fundamental breakdown? I think not. That's what my experience with addiction probably informs me. I hope that answers or meets the question.
Thank you, Tom, for sharing that. In order to grow, we need to break down, to rebuild ourselves, and to look at our belief systems, assumptions, addictions, and all that, value systems. It's like today, when we look around, it's like we are in a huge rites of passage. We had a podcast with the Hutchins earlier this week or last week, and he mentioned that as well. It's like a huge shadow that we see of the masculine that has not dealt with all these shadows, and then also the balance of the feminine and masculine energies. But I wanted to go back also to the first time I met you. I think it was in Ibiza. I think it was at an event at Paola's. And I remember the first time I heard you talking, and you had such an eloquent language already at that time. And that was still before you started your Gaia for Life and Cards for Life concept, which was actually also a concept that were created when you were, if I remember correctly, on a journey alone in nature. And so I love that the process of creation that actually, because of that breakdown and then connecting to nature and actually like nearly be in a virgin state of creation, and then come out with these things, which then also, of course, captures everything that you have learned before. But especially also because we can go in that very deep on the whole eco-linguistic thing and all that, which is also a passion of Alex. So I wanted to get to that level of creation of like, how did you come to all that, the concepts that you're working with now?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question, Rudy. Yeah, I think one thing that comes to mind is, and that I'm increasingly allowing myself the kind of label or archetype of artist, actually. I've written and performed poetry and rapped and freestyled and had commissions of poems from quite a young age. And that's been my main sort of creative medium. But I recognize the creative process takes many forms, right? Even today, running a workshop for my class, I had to do something quite radical departure from what I usually do. And I really enjoyed the thrill of having to create, reassemble the parts, bring in something else. It's a cohort in East Asia, so it's nighttime for them. And usually I do this exercise in the day, get people away from the screen. So I had to do something very different. And it kind of switched me on. So I know that I need to create to be in a good flow. And it feels good to be kind of learning about that now with more seriousness than I think that's ever had before. And maybe I appreciate that it's a real talent for me to work with in however I can professionalize my sort of calling in the world, not something that I could do outside that. If I hadn't created Cards for Life, then I think I would have created something else. Connecting with nature helped me make room for that. Joining the Bio Leadership Fellowship was a great space to clear out some room. I did enter that with an intention to go, okay, carbon removal was really a fascinating journey to look at planetary health on that scale. But my gifts weren't being expressed there, at least in the way I entered that work. And I wanted to kind of come back to me. What's mine to do? And I think the creativity piece was something that was actually missing before. The other work kind of ticked all the boxes in terms of like it looked right for purpose, but I didn't have freedom to create there. And another part of that journey is kind of becoming my own boss and creating my own thing rather than working in other people's projects, as was the case in the past. I think Cards for Life came through as a synthesis. It's like a collection of all of the things that I find most inspiring and that I think would be some of the most useful concepts to put in our toolbox to apply to changing the world, to regenerating the world. So I kind of had to gather all that up in a creative way with a bit of poetry sprinkled in there and some visual depictions, that kind of creative combination. But there was definitely an intention to make some room for that to happen. I did actually start creating the cards before I did my first serious kind of wilderness solo. So 48 hours just sitting by a stream in the Scottish wilderness. But the cards were very raw. I had like one little prototype deck. And so there was a lot of refinement, and the book came and the course came and everything after that. I remember having that with me, not actually on the solo, but on that trip. And I think that real deep moment of, yeah, just kind of flattening everything, all the noise. It's really wonderful it's such a gift to oneself to make that time for stillness, realize how chronically distracted and busy I think we all are in the time that we live. So I took that time, and I think the cards had sort of arrived just as buds, but out the other side of that, they really kind of, okay, this is coming into the world now. So yeah, I think that's kind of how I'd say it happened.
My journey with language is by the time I was 11, I had lived in 6 cities on 5 continents, and Rudy already knows this because I repeated it a few times. But I spoke 5 languages by that time. But just because I knew how to speak languages didn't mean I knew how to speak. I live in a culture in the United States where we went through a period of cancel culture. And so there was this idea that you had to police the way you speak. Certain words you cannot say. I mean, it's not illegal to say certain words, but you shouldn't be saying these words in society. And so language becomes very confusing when you're trying to figure out all of this. And I came across a book called Conscious Language by Robert Tennyson Stevens. And it showed the structure of language and how to use language and the meaning of words. And this was at a time when I was coming into right relationship with myself and with the world. Like, how am I in integrity with me and with the world? And so much of it is through language. And through that transformation, I came to a place where I trust myself. Like, I don't have to think about what I'm going to say because I know that when I open my mouth, it will be okay. It will be good. It's coming from the heart. I am in right relationship. So I'm wondering, what is your approach to language and conceptual language? Like, how does language open up or limit what we see? Is there a relationship like to the symbolic world and archetypes and what
Mm.
we manifest for ourselves?
Yeah. Wow, thanks, Alex. And so nice to learn a bit more about your journey as well. And I've got the cards out on my desk, so I'm just going to show this one, which is for circling. And the phrase is council culture, an obvious play on council.
I love that.
We need more council space, circle space, and less policing, as you say. Yes, just connecting with that question on language. Could you
Oh,
refresh?
but I love that council, council, like community culture, council culture. Yeah, it's really about how does language structure our experience? You know, does it open up our consciousness and what we see in the world, or does it limit it? Is there a relationship with archetypes and the symbolic world?
Yeah, right. Yeah, thanks so much. And I'm really fascinated about the kind of linguistics of archetypology and symbology or kind of semiotics. And I feel like I'm maybe sort of more at the beginning of that journey, but I'd start by answering with, yeah, I really love how you talk about, does it expand or contract us? Does it widen or kind of close the world? And I think that's the perfect way of considering concepts. Is it expanding or is it kind of closing us? And I think my sort of journey into that was eco-linguistics and looking at a kind of ecological critique of language in that field. And I guess sort of inspired a bit by NLP, looking at language and how we're programming our relationships, talking in the present affirmative, like I am capable, I am strong, or whatever, not I want to be. Some of those techniques with language, meeting eco-linguistics, I think started to lead to stuff like, do we build community or do we grow community? You'll hear people say over and over again, I'm building a community, we're building community here. That's missing a vital dimension of what community is as a phenomenon, which actually goes through cycles of renewal. Buildings don't go through cycles of renewal. They're made of modular parts, and you can replace a brick or a tile. But people aren't like that, right? Like the participants of community aren't like that. Community does need infrastructure, and I think a lot of the time people are talking about the place they're building where community can form. But then I think they miss what it takes to bring people together to get them to commune and how those relationships grow over time and multiple capitals of exchange and cycles and seasons and rituals and all of that stuff. And then probably we enter kind of the language of archetypes and things as well to think, well, like people aren't uniform bricks, they're different archetypal expressions. And so how do they connect to each other? So I'm really interested in bringing these vital concepts to language because it's very mechanistic. When I hear someone talking about, and this is kind of from the old carbon removal, almost sustainability, environmental world, sort of pre-regeneration, we talk about, moving the needle on carbon. And just that phrase, like as though we're disembodied, disconnected from the planet, looking at a dashboard and there's a kind of CO2 meter and we're trying to move the needle to get CO2 to the right place. It's crazy. Like it's not a machine like that. There isn't, a dashboard for planetary health. It requires a very different kind of approach. And I think you can see that where mechanical language, when we talk about the world and ourselves as a machine, then that does start to shape the way we behave and the kinds of things that we create and build rather than grow. We'll build huge machines to suck in CO2, doesn't actually seem like a feasible project anyway. But that's because the language is all about fixing the climate. We could restore whale populations to pre-industrial levels and they could remove our global emissions, annual global emissions. But then also probably carbon is not the right thing to be focusing on. So it's quite tricky with language. I guess there's so much to learn, and I'm not an academic or a real scholar of linguistics. I think I do kind of applied language shifting with sort of quite light touch method and framework. But I do look for that, like, is it opening or closing? And I think there's something about kind of closing down about building, but like growing community, just to use that example, it sort of opens up the possibility space. And emergence is like that too, that concept of emergence, which is great that this is in the title of this space and these conversations that you're convening. Maybe I'll just pause there.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Beautiful. I want to dig a bit further into Cards for Life. I still have my VOV pack. As you were exploring them and actually testing them in one of our retreats in Ibiza at the time, what I like really much about the concept is that you create curiosity for anyone who gets the cards in hand in, thinking and looking differently and even feeling differently at a given concept. But what I love the most is that you basically put it in 3 parts, like the being part, the doing part, and then the dynamics part, which is like basically the transformation that we are going through is firstly focus on our own being and our inner transformation. Then we realize, okay, how can I now apply my transformation and being into the world out there and start doing things? But then there's all these dynamics around us influencing basically what we are doing. So, and I want to hear a bit also, like you have been since then evolving, with a lot of workshops. You do online workshops. You have been building actually a global community around the whole concept. Congratulations for that. I really love seeing that. Have you seen any really breakthroughs in workshops of people using the cards, or even with organizations or companies, like when they use the cards, how they open up? Because I really see the cards as something that opens up basically your whole being.
Well, thanks, Rudy. And it's been such a pleasure to actually share this journey, like in the time that we've known each other. Obviously met before the cards, but in the last couple of years have been in touch, and you've really seen the emergence of them. I want to answer that about how they've affected people and changes that they've made. I'll just start by sharing a couple. And I think from what you were speaking to and your question, Alex, like, here's the potential card. And one of the questions on the back, so every card has an image, a poetic phrase, and then some prompts to think about how you connect on an individual scale with this concept of potential. And the other side is a series of questions to apply that concept to a larger system than yourself. Team, an organization, a relationship, a building. And it says, what if we switched our focus from solving problems to realizing potentials? It's a completely different orientation. Is it narrowing us or is it expanding us? Back to that carbon example, if we see addressing carbon as a problem to be fixed, rather than looking for potentials that we can realize, like the regeneration of other living beings that do that work as part of their vital life, the carbon work. It's a completely different orientation, and everything about it, I think, feels different. Another one from the doing set is this cycle nutrients, and there's this kind of like mountain, this is like a landfill, actually. It's one of the kind of less pleasant images. Someone got really triggered by this card, and we ended up having to have a discussion about it. She almost wanted me to change the name of the card, because she said, this isn't nutrients, this isn't a picture of nutrients. I actually couldn't understand her for a while, and she kind of said it's cycling materials. Obviously, the card is speaking to the circular economy idea, right? Waste is simply nutrients out of circulation. That's what it says. It also talks about shadow work. A monster is that which grows when we don't engage with it. Integrate the shadow and bring in the externalities. What the card's trying to say is landfills are like monsters. They're like the shadows that we've not integrated, all our waste. But when we turn to it, we realize landfills are incredibly densely rich in precious metals, in all forms of technical nutrients, if we could develop the means of recirculating them, which is definitely not an impossible task. It's a technical challenge, right? And this woman felt like it needed to say cycle materials. Materials is a dead word to me. Nutrients is alive. So the whole point of the card is to open us up to that possibility. Right? Rather than just say, this is waste. Hopefully we can do something about it, fix this problem. It's like taking an image that's disturbing and saying, there's potential in here. And also it relates to a personal development process. What are your landfills of, ignored stuff clogging up your landscape? So people are confronted by the cards actually quite often. There's a card for entanglement, and there are a number of cards that people, it's really fun to watch now because I'm very confident with this tool. People think I've got a bad card. If it's collapse or disruption or constraint or impermanence with these kind of, decaying leaves, and they think, oh, I got a bad card. And they actually always have the most profound lift from that once they go through it. I remember one person saying she had the entanglement card and had to go and observe, look for examples of entanglement. We do this observation practice with the cards and we come back and share what we saw. And this person came back and said, I get it, entanglement, but my work is very clear. This person was like a journalist and said, I have very specific audiences and I've keyed my language to speak very specifically to these different audiences and they're not entangled. So it's like, right, when I first started the project, I'd take such a kind of pushback as like, oh God, maybe the cards are not very good. Now I know, okay, that's your process. And I get curious and I say, oh, great, well, tell me more about that. So this person was sharing why the concept of entanglement didn't relate to them. And then someone said, oh, that's interesting. It sounds like all these different audiences are entangled in you. Right? You're like the meeting point of all of these groups and you just, boom. But there was a wonderful, a massive release actually of a lot of constriction, trying to keep things very organized. But really, that's just a conceptual way of kind of ordering a life. It doesn't need to be like that. It can be more interwoven, more dynamic. So the cards really helped that shift. And this person, by the end of the session, was holding the uncertainty card like a prize. How much uncertainty is ahead? How much potential possibility is around them? So I'm really enjoying these kind of reframings of the language. I think where they're supporting teams and organizations, if there's a particular challenge in doing culture change work, right? Providing a vocabulary, because people want to know, okay, great, we'll get the cards. Where's it going to get us? And I think, well, it's not really an appropriate question. You have to meet all of this halfway with an intention to do things differently that are aligned with values and in service to life beyond just human benefit. So what's that going to look like? I don't know. It's not the same as saying, well, anything could happen. There's a trajectory here, of course, that we're going to go on, but people have to kind of let go of some certainty and sort of meet the cards halfway. And that's a developmental process in itself, I find. So it does that for people, right? Their attachment to the illusion of control and certainty or certain levels of it. And then seeing really great innovations in processes and policies, from the seasons and cycles card starting a conversation about menstrual leave, which led to a policy in a leadership training organization. Boom, that was fast. Like layering purpose, encouraging a team to think about what other kind of functions or purpose was layered into their actual office building and space. And the card kind of invites to think about nested systems. If this is our habitat, who else could live here? So bird boxes and planting wildflowers and things just on a small bit of real estate. So people are really translating these into action now, and they're sharing that around the world. And that's starting to feel really exciting as the project kind of grows from the edges now into a truly international multilingual project. But when teams are adopting the cards and they're making a practice out of it, then I see changes coming thick and fast. If people want a workshop and like a fixed single output, that can happen, but that's not really the mindset that the cards are sort of encouraging, supporting.
Oh, that was wonderful. That brought up a lot of things for me. I like this idea of reframing the language, where you see, instead of seeing a pile of waste, you see a cycle of nutrients. And so it's kind of a way of rewilding yourself and rewilding the world. Like suddenly, just through language, you've shifted your lens and you're seeing something new and you're seeing potential and opportunity. I think that's wonderful. I was watching your video, Thinking Like Gaia, where you talk about the cards. And I think in there you say, even just with three cards, the potential combinations is like 52,000 or something. Just from a deck of cards, just pulling out three randomly, there's like 52,000 ways you can do that. And that's wonderful. And you showed a card which is mythos and logos. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so there's like a symbolic kind of language that we don't always use is in those cards as well. And all of that made me think of like a mythopoetic field, like a relational field. Like a card is a card, but a tarot card, for example, is more than a card. Because when you pull a tarot card, you get into relationship with the images, the meaning, and there's like a storytelling that happens. Like, oh, there's even like a synchronicity, like, oh, I'm going through this in life, and my day today is disorganized, and I just pulled up this tarot card, which speaks exactly to that. And so there's like this magical mythopoetic field that's created between this inert object, which is a card, but your mind creates this storytelling like, oh, but this card is truly relevant for me today. And so I'm wondering, is there like a process of drawing the cards and you just pick them out and then you start this storytelling process, really? And there might be synchronicities with what you're going through.
Oh, thanks, Alex. You're really kind of with the heart of it. And it's like a synchronicity engine, this system. It's generating synchronicities at an amazing rate. I've been reading about synchronicity recently. There's a book called The Playful Universe, and it's actually a collection of essays by Post-Materialist Institute. Amazing essays, incredible PhDs, founders of consciousness studies institutes and things. And it's a collection of essays by all these different people about their experiences of synchronicity. I like that you say a kind of a mythopoetic field, and actually Cards for Life feels like a field. And I'll share with you actually, I don't know really what to call it, if it's a vision, an imagining, a sense, a projection. But the image is, and this kind of came last autumn where I feel like really the wings of this project opened. And the image is of kind of like a void, a volume of space studded with little lights. And it's like if you imagined every deck of cards, and there's hundreds and hundreds of packs all over the world, they've really spread very broadly in all continents. If you remove the planet and these card decks were just like lights in this volume of space, that's kind of what the image is. And they start to blink and then they start to synchronize. And that system is somehow moving, communicating with itself. It's choosing people, it's meeting people, and then kind of moving through them, especially the stewards that it's met who've created translations in different languages. You know, we have a Chinese version, we launched them in France, we're starting a course in Brazil, Swahili, Urdu in Pakistan, 7 different European languages. Japanese partners just joined, Indonesian, Malaysian were on the call today, Sri Lankan version. So it's like this, I kind of feel like the cards are sort of choosing people, and I think it feels good and exciting to sort of have that belief and know that there's a mystery at the center here that I can't fully describe. And I think that mystery lands in sort of everyday experience when you do pick a card and you go, oh, wow, that's the 4th time I've had that in a row. That is interesting. And it seems very improbable from a kind of statistical probability point of view. And more than that, it feels really important to me. And then people will go, yeah, but this is crazy. Like, okay, what if I picked the other card? Would I have connected with that in the same way? And I'm not sure we can know that because we only have one experience at a time. So we can always try and think, yeah, I think if I got the other card, I could have had a really strong feeling about that. But you can't know because you didn't get the other card. You got that one and it was meaningful. So that mystery is kind of great because it stirs people up a little bit. And even if they don't kind of believe in anything spiritual, they're having an experience that there's something more going on than they can explain. And I think that's really healthy too. I'm really understanding synchronicity now as, and just in the last few weeks since reading this work and understanding what Jung was saying about synchronicity, that it's a moment where our interior world and the external world, the boundary between them disappears. And we might feel that that's kind of the truth, right? We're like incarnated, we have this sort of ego, which is a momentary fragment of a kind of universal consciousness. Many different traditions, philosophies will talk about a similar kind of thing going on, that we're not really separate, right? But we're experiencing separation for discovering ourselves, becoming more, whatever it is. But the part that I'm really interested in is that when that boundary dissolves between the inner and the outer. And so for a while I've been saying, oh, I'm interested where inner and outer work meet. But that's kind of come to a deeper level now with understanding synchronistic experience. And one thing that these studies on synchronicity have shown is that the more people study synchronicity, the more they experience it as well, which is kind of not surprising, but also great. So it makes it kind of easy. So the more synchronistic experiences you have, the more synchronistic experiences you have. And I think the cards are giving people a very quick, very easy experience of synchronicity. They're going, oh my God, I was just talking to my partner about this morning. How could I have got this card now? You know? And when I'm doing this course, there's like 18 people on the course, and I take the energy card and I pass it to someone, and they've taken the energy card. And then the third person has got the fluidity card, which is also water. And the fourth person's got the fluidity card. And there were all these kind of pairings. So it's really exciting. There's loads of potential in those combinations for this experience to happen. And then when we start to learn to read the world in that way, see the world as a mirror to our interiority or the other way around, go, oh, yeah, that's interesting. I just saw that number 33 while I was thinking about this person. So I am going to call them. Whatever that is, we're just learning to pay attention. Is there a sign out there that's matching what's going on in here? And then kind of acting on it. So I see the cards as part of that. And I think, yeah, mythos and logos is about, I use that to talk about the two sides of the card and how they're kind of engaging both sides of the brain. Because I think if they were just with mythos and this was like a regenerative tarot, that might be great. But I think there's something distinct about cards for life because potential is like, that's such a neutral concept in a way. And acorns, yeah, like there's an oak tree in there. How does that work? There's an oak tree emerges from there. Like there's enough going on with that without pentacles and robes and the whole kind of wardrobe of symbols that we get from traditions like tarot, which I really, hold very dearly. And I think the tarot system is amazing and I appreciate that. But I think Cards for Life is something slightly different. There's a logos there as well, which is like a living knowledge that leans towards action, that wants to do stuff, that actually wants to alter the world in ways that's going to create more thriving for all, and keep expanding things, not squashing them down. And I think that's different. There isn't like a tarot deck that's giving you suggestions about how to regenerate life on Earth, or Cards for Life is now trying to do that.
Beautiful, Tom. I sense that we're going to have to draw a card before we end this podcast. But before that, perhaps Alex, you wanted to dig still a bit deeper, or you have an anticipating question on Tom's?
Oh, I think it's beautiful the way you expressed that. And for me, it's re-enchanting the world. We get stuck in these very rational, Cartesian, structured ways of being in the world, especially when we live in cities, when we live in corporates. I have a 30-year corporate background. I have a business background and school background. And so it's very like Cartesian. And you see the world in a very mechanistic way with deadlines and objectives and dashboards. And the card is magical. It creates storytelling and it re-enchants the world. And you get this synchronicity, and your Cartesian mind says, this is beyond coincidence. Like, how can it be that today I get this card? Right. And so it opens the consciousness, and you start to see, like, you start to use your imagination again, and you see magic in the world. And I think it makes for a better world and a more exciting reality to live in. So I don't really have a question, but this is very exciting for me. So thank you.
Yeah, what I love about the cards is you can use them by yourself individually, like as tarot cards, and learn by yourself. But then also in groups, they work really well. As you mentioned, you increase the level of synchronicity. But we have some more time, but also to have a question on the importance of community and your work with bioleadership, where you also, you're connected to regenerators all over the world and all that. What actually does regeneration mean to you? And also, how do you spread this message in these communities, and why communities are so important in this whole, let's say, shifting towards the next paradigm that we are living now?
Thank you, Rudy and Alex, for reflecting back that energy and encouragement as well. It's been a wonderful inspiration and honor to work with the Bioleadership Project. And now this is taking up more and more of my time. I'm probably going to be just focusing fully on the Cards for Life project, which, as I say, is now starting in many other countries. It's another kind of network People have talked about it as like connective tissue for the regenerative movement. I love that phrase, that the cards are kind of just like weaving threads between people in every workshop that they participate in. And that tends to be across these communities of practice, from Regenerators Academy and the Capital Institute, Bioleadership, and, just to kind of name a few. So we do see these communities of practice emerging, and there's this kind of Bacana two loops model of like the old system collapsing and the new system emerging. And in that kind of upswinging loop, you've got these kind of little islands of coherence, but then they start to become communities of practice, and then the communities themselves connect, and then they become the new status quo. I'm feeling so on my purpose track for, sticking my life so far to get here, but I feel like I know what I can do in this context is offer this tool and a light training that helps strengthen that connective tissue between the communities of practice. So while there is a kind of Cards for Life practitioner community, the cards and the processes very much hang out between those spaces and overlap them. So it's not exclusive in that way. So that's one thing that maybe feels a distinct offering that's coming with them. But I think that phrase comes to mind of the next Buddha won't be, is it Thich Nhat Hanh said this, won't be an individual, but will be a community, a Sangha. And I think it's really interesting when we look at the macro level of that potential and we see a shift from a unipolar world to a polycentric one, which seems to be happening more and more every day, especially with the current radical shifts in geopolitics. As above, so below, we're actually going to have to learn to collaborate on a national scale for global coordination if we're to survive. I don't necessarily believe that we will. I think, like Charles Eisenstein says, it's only a rite of passage it's not a rite of passage if we know we're going to make it, if it's already got guide rails on. But I think what we have to the bottleneck we have to get through now is actually to learn how to work together, collaborate peacefully. And in the past, there has been a peaceful order, but with one supreme power able to destroy anyone else. That's not really a balanced situation, right? And it actually hasn't lasted very long. And I can feel the anxiety associated with actually having to work that out and work through it. And there's going to be conflict along the way. And I think that's the global world situation. And I think it's as true for us in more local ways, like how we actually form stable communities and find harmony in a world that is full of disruption. And there's international travel and things that, village communities, place-based, land-based tribes have found their harmony, but didn't have all of that level of change. So I feel like I'm veering all over the place with my answer to a question now, but I think community is incredibly important, and there's a kind of a coordination challenge or potential for us to realize where we can work together, which is why it's so lovely to be in conversation with both of you, because there's really a spirit of that, of like gathering these voices, this emergence. And with the men's work, we connect on Rudy and that you're all engaged in. I think that's part of it. It was part of that pattern too, of working together.
Yeah, and Alex is also doing a lot of men's work. What I love the most is this concept of weaving, like regeneration is very a local concept, like how can we create and sustain living systems locally? But I think the technology allows us to weave these communities and these connections also internationally and globally, which we're going to need to move to the next transition. But Alex has the next question for you.
And I think we're moving towards the close, but I participate in indigenous rites of passage, Lakota tradition called the sun dance. And there is some pain involved. Not only is there fasting for 4 days with no food and water, but there's a particular ritual that's part of it where it's not certain you're going to make it through. Like everyone makes it through, but Eisenstein said, is it really a rite of passage if you know you're going to make it through? I know I'm going to make it through. But there's still like a hesitation, a reticence, like, do I really want to go through with this? And like a doubt in the mind. And that's what makes it a rite of passage. Like we have to go through that pain or that suffering in order to grow. But the seed of the future has been planted. You showed us the chestnut card. That's going to grow into a tree. And so my question then is, what is emerging now through this kind of transition period or collapse we're living through? What is the voice of emergence whispering to you now? What comes next?
What comes next for me in this project? Yeah.
Well, it could be for you in the project or for the world, and however you see that.
Well, I'm talking a lot to people at the moment about West Africa's decolonization and Burkina Faso and what's happening there. So I have to mention that as part of the emergence. And the other side of the American news cycle, which I feel gets obsessive quite quickly, and there's a bigger picture, which is the emancipation of the African people across the continent. We're seeing that happen in real time, and it's important to bring our attention there because it's not so much in the Western press. I'm going to be going to China next to do the launch of the Chinese Cards for Life, and then Brazil later in the year for the Portuguese one. And that kind of fits also with this like geopolitical, geographical exploration where I want to look at the world from different angles. And I think what brings both of those things together, I guess my interest in the world situation, this time in history, and this project is which contains a kind of personal development challenge for me of actually giving away and letting go of something that it's true to say I've created it. It's also true to say that it's come through me. And it feels mature and wise, but not easy to say it's actually not mine. And it's very interesting where people say, like, oh, have you copyrighted it? Someone could copy that. And I think, yeah, like I I mean, I don't want to be naive, but that's not how this is going to work. That will kill it. You know, it's something that if genuinely feels alive, and that's what people say about Cards for Life and Thinking Like Gaia. And I think that trying to manage, that trying to constrain will kill something essential. I drew some cards while we were talking, and this one is decentralized, a doing card, a way of doing, and it says the revolution will be decentralized. So I think in my own kind of coaching journey, supporting people to create their own version of the cards, change the images to reflect their bioregion, really bring them, adapt and interpret them into their own language, and then run a course training people to use them. That's like an ultimate coaching journey for me to take someone on. Really exciting. And now they have become, you know, Jenny is the steward of Cards for Life Brazil. Xinling is the steward of Cards for Life China. Fazil is steward of Cards for Life. I could say Kenya, but it's really the Swahili coast because that language isn't constrained by that country. And it's for them to decide. And I'm kind of in a process now where some of them are saying to me, oh, we're thinking about this decision. And like, this is your decision to make. Oh, okay, I think we should do this. Great, that sounds good to me. So I'm really enjoying that process of trying to decentralize this effort. And my vision for Cards for Life is that I think it can be a humble contribution to a new era where we can actually produce something like a card deck that is creating more life than it's taking, printed using green energy, vegan inks, and I could talk about all those credentials. And it's also there's a decolonial aspect to this project, and it's in resonance with moving into a polycentric world where it's not a European export conceptually to other countries, and that's really important for me and important some discomfort to be with. In Kenya when I was there recently, think about British history in Kenya, but also like the disenfranchisement of the African continent. Even more important, it feels that this project should be meeting some of that history, the possibility of transformation, of healing. And that's not something I can do to that place. Someone from there needs to want that to happen. So I work with this principle of invitation. I don't actually go anywhere. I don't just choose, oh, I'd like to take the cards to Greece. They make their own way to Malaysia and someone says, are you going to come out to this region and do something? Great, the invitation is there, and then we'll build on that. So yeah, a vision of something that's produced in a regenerative way that is really global, multilingual, and shows us how we can have a global conversation about the life of the world, of which we're all a part, and that can be locally differentiated and individuated in local places. That's kind of the vision. All of that can hang together in a project as simple as a card deck and a facilitator training program. Yeah.
Thank you, Tom, for this very rich conversation and explanation about your work, your beautiful work. I think honestly that every class should have a deck in their school to pull cards and play with them. So I would like to perhaps draw a card for each one of us before we close. Yeah. So Alex, would you like a doing card, a being card, or dynamics card?
Let's do dynamics.
Dynamics for, okay, I'm going to pull it. I don't look, I just pull it. I'm going to put it clear here.
Take a breath, and as long as you don't do it in a rush, really, that's what I always say to people.
Tom, you would like a being card or doing or
I'll take
dynamics?
the being card, please.
Okay. And then I'm going to have to take a doing card. Wow, beautiful. This is just to show also the beauty of these cards. For Alex, I drew the disruption card.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'll read from it. There is no breakthrough without breakdown, what we talked about what we started the podcast on. Accept the inevitability of disruption and make use of the opportunities it brings. Work with disruption to shake loose old structures that no longer serve. There are more questions on the back, but that's for the people to discover. And for Tom, I drew the fluidity card, which comes back to actually the circle that you had before you mentioned about energy and fluidity. So here it's back. What a coincidence, right? Or synchronicity.
That's the third time then it's come up in a row.
Wow, look at that. See your life as a river running, seeking depth. Changing circumstance, change you, taking the path of least resistance and go with the flow. To be fluid is to be fluent, communicate well. And actually, it's a very good card, because I had this epiphany at the end of last year that in order to move through all my breakthroughs, I could be as water. And, just that thought of being like water, sometimes I can be a small river with a bubbling water, or then I come into a pool that is like sitting and needs some time and is still. And then there's some flood coming and I go in a wild river down, and then still there's a waterfall, or then I still have the ocean to come into. So it's a very great concept to work with, I find. And so the card that I drew is empower, which it's so me, right, Tommy? You know me, Alex knows me. Power over, power within, power with, power to. Become powerful enough to empower others. Demonstrate leadership by giving power to and holding power with others so they can shape their own life, relationships, and world. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the cards for life. We will include the links in the video and the Spotify bio. Tom, if you want to say a last word, perhaps on your work or where you're going next.
Thank you, Rudy. The last thing I'll say then is there's a card deck and a community of practice that comes with. There's a Thinking Like Gaia basic facilitator course, but what I'm really excited about is the next layer of the project that's unfolded, which is a Becoming Gaia workbook. It's a series of templates that you can physically place the cards on. It's a kind of immersive experience with some sound design in, and a much richer journey that's emerging to integrate these concepts. Yeah, the project continues to unfold. I just want to say thank you so much to both of you for really rich generative conversation. I've really felt honored by all of your questions, and so grateful to share this time and space with you both. So thank you.
Thank you, Tom. I truly feel privileged, and I very much enjoyed the conversation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. What I love is that when you see or meet people that are working regeneration and truly doing the work in integration, when you meet them or you follow them over the course of life and through their journey, you can see, like with the project of Tom, is a perfect example of how life can unfold when you really let it unfold, let all the beauty from within come to life from the love that you can spread onto others and our planet. So thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.